So let me introduce Dixie Bosley, a very passionate person. I don't know that it's completely visible on her, but she is. She is a geriatric care manager, very impressive credentials, and a nurse practitioner at Iona Senior Services. She spent the last 30-plus years developing wellness programs, raising a family, caring her own aging parents, this is already exhausting, and advocating for informed end-of-life care in various community settings. She's been a hospice nurse and refers to herself as an end-of-life activist. So if you're feeling active about end-of-life, you can tell Dixie, and she'll take us. So Dixie, you're on.
All right, thanks, Mary. It's really a great joy to be with you in this small space and also with folks on Zoom. In this, what feels like to me, holy ground. I mean, Martha's Table is a nonprofit, as Charles said, that just has amazing roots. And to see what they've done in Southeast is just very heartwarming. And I love that they have welcomed us here today. So just a little bit about my brief journey to kind of help you understand why I am an activist about end of life. As a brand new nurse at a nursing school in the mid-'80s, I found myself on an HIV/AIDS floor where all my patients suffered and all my patients died, and they died horrible deaths. And because of that, I wanted to understand that knowing the sacrifice these men were making for treatments that we have today, I did want to understand, like, what about if people choose not to continue treatment? So I found my way into, helped start Joseph's House, which is a home for homeless men with AIDS in Adams Morgan. It celebrated its 32nd year, I guess, last year. And that was for men who didn't have the financial resources to deal with their HIV/AIDS and actually were coming there to die. And it was just a beautiful blending of both gay professional men who had lost their housing and resources and many African-American men who were addicted and had acquired AIDS, and they lived all together in this very amazing home.
I want to just ask, for this particular crowd, are all of you in the back hearing Dixie? This is your microphone.
No, I have.
Oh, your mic too?
Yeah.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
We love this tech team.
Yeah. Yeah, this is kind of awesome. So Joseph's House was a special place of us able to help people live until they die, and they have chosen to go there and terminate their treatment. And Capital Caring actually has a lot of our clients at Joseph's House. So then from Joseph's House, I went to community hospice. When community hospice closed, which was very heartbreaking to me, I found my way to Iona Senior Services, and it's been a perfect marriage for me because I come with a deep understanding about end-of-life planning, because I really do believe that we can describe how we want to live by talking about how we want to die. And the more we talk about it in venues like this, these kind of conversations will keep us, it gives us a better chances of having the deaths we want. And in not talking about it, we know what happens, right? We know what happens when the crisis happens and the person we love has had a fall and a head injury and they're in ICU, and you have to make really hard decisions and under a lot of stress. So there's a lot of great research, and this book that I love, Extreme Measures, who was written by a palliative care doctor, and I mean, she was an ICU doctor who became a palliative care doctor. And what she says, in order to rebuild this broken system, we must begin by facing our fear of our personal extinction and the resultant drive to find something, anything, to save us from our own deaths. And that, it just really captures what's happening. And I applaud the Village for offering this event today. I went online, I learned a little bit about Capitol Hill Village. I know Liz really well. We raised our kids together at school, and I've gotten to know Mary because Mary actually attended our End-of-Life Expo at Iona. And that happened 2 years ago in November of 19. We had 300 people register. We could only handle 200. And it broke my heart that we couldn't do this every year because a pandemic hit the next year. And so what we've been doing is monthly talks. Every month, third Thursdays, we have a talk on Zoom. I'm hoping we can get back in person. But we talk about burials, we talk about body donation. We talk about writing your own obituary. I was going to say autobiography, obituary. You know, all these talks. We have Capital Caring come in and talk about hospice. So we've broken down the event into monthly events, which is, you know, what you guys are doing, and I think it's so awesome that you're having these events. So bravo to Capitol Hill Village. So we can go on with the slides and. Oh yeah, sure. I'm sorry. Not you. Thanks a lot. Is it turning on? I think also I just want to say, like, the impact of COVID, right? We have all experienced somebody that we've known who has suffered and has passed this last year. So COVID, you know, the gun violence in our culture, the war in Ukraine, we are inundated with death. And for me, it is really healing to be here with you and turn another corner on this. Like, you know, we need to recognize it, but also we need to say that we need to seek into our own values and choices, which is the name of my presentation. And I hope that we all can become good disciples of a good death. So anyway, we can go on to the next one. Okay, so what I'm going to describe today is understanding our future is important, like what is our individual future, getting specifics from our clinicians, identifying what matters most, considering all the ways that modern medicine prolongs our lives, and then communicating and documenting what we want. And, you know, hopefully you guys, after this amazing day of all these extra workshops, and I'm just going to kind of touch on them, but we're going to dive deeper throughout the day. And you can really document this and start having conversations that will give you a real sense of security. So how do you view your death? I mean, how do you view your current health right now? And that's so important to thinking about or fearing your own death. Do you see yourself as young and healthy, old and healthy, chronically ill, seriously ill, or are you someone who's nearing death? And it's important to know where you are, where's your foundation, what's your perception of your place, your current state of health. I want to introduce you to my friend Emmy Lou, and I saw her 2 nights ago for champagne and dinner because one of my friends said, I need an Emmy Lou night. And literally, my friends call me to have dinner with Emmy Lou. She is someone who now lives, she lived independently up until 3 months ago. She now lives in the Armed Forces retirement community because she served as a wave. And last month, at the Memorial Day concert, I got to see her on stage with her little wave with I think there were 8 women that served wax and wave that were actually honored at the Capitol. But what I love about Emmy Lou, I serve as her power of attorney. She's been my friend for, I don't know, ever since I've been in D.C. And her daughter is in Michigan, and she has a disabled son. So I serve as her power of attorney and kind of her close-by daughter. And we constantly talk about, if this is going to happen, let's plan for this, let's plan for that. And I just feel like she is someone who lives fully. Her days are so busy. She goes Qigong, Tai Chi, poetry class, her DreamWorks class. I literally have to book time with her. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. When we went out the other night, I dropped her off at around 10:15, and she's like, what time is it? And I said, 10:15. And she's like, oh, good. We've had a nice long night of drinking wine. She's just a riot. And she's 98 years old. Oh, she's awesome. Okay, so looking at understanding your own trajectory, so I've listed here, if you look at function over time, a sudden death would be like a gunshot, a car accident, you're high function and you have no function. A terminal illness is something that you kind of waver down, and then all of a sudden there's a drop-off toward the end of a terminal illness where treatments may not last much longer. An organ failure or chronic illness is usually like something like COPD or diabetes, where there's treatments and you have a dip, but then treatment make you feel better and there's a slow decline. And then a frailty is something we call failure to thrive, or just the dwindles, where people are just old for a long time and just have little chronic minor things. And then I've had patients in hospice that were 104. And I had to fight to get them on hospice because they didn't have a qualifying organ failure. But anyway, so that's just a long, frailty, so it's a long, drawn-out process. And we all know people who are frail. For some reason, I keep thinking I'm not. Okay, so no fake news. Get the facts from your clinician. And this is how you do it. You want to say to your clinician, you want to understand the patterns of your medical trajectory if you have a particular illness. What treatments might be offered to optimize your health? What treatments have potential benefits and burdens? And if living longer is important, how much life am I expected to have for this particular treatment or for this particular treatment? And studies have shown that when people sign on to hospice earlier in their course of their illness, if they're terminal, they extend their life. I'm not kidding. I've seen it happen. I know it happens, and I'm a believer. So, but hospice is used less than 7 days on the national average. So all the services, all the equipment, all the caregivers, all the hoopla, and then the person dies in less than 7 days. What potential symptoms will I encounter? And that's a really important question to ask, because if you're taking on a medical treatment, there will always be symptoms from those treatments, right? You might have like low blood count, you might have weakness or fluid collection, you might have something from the treatment. And it's important to ask the doctor, what are the symptoms that I will get from the treatments? And the person who wrote this book, Dr. Zitter, she actually was an ICU doctor who became a palliative care doctor, and now she blends the two. So palliative care is very important, and even if you're not hospice eligible, it's wise to look at palliative care if you're managing symptoms along with curative care. And we need to ask our clinicians, I'm struggling with nausea, can I see a palliative care clinician? And each of the major hospitals have palliative care teams. So the goal is truth. That's what we want from our physicians. And you also very much, I underscore, to bring somebody with you, to take notes, to be a presence, to accompany you. And I think that's also the best way you can inform yourself about what you want, is to, and I know that's the whole model of the village, right? Like you all take each other to appointments all the time. And I think it's so beautiful because, you are living that experience with somebody and you're kind of sharing their struggle. And it's just a beautiful, the whole village model, I think, is just sacred to me. And I really applaud it. And I'm so happy that it's such a vibrant village and that the village movement's happening across the country. But never go alone. Aging is not for loneliness. And we've learned that from the COVID, right? We've had forced isolation, and we've learned that we cannot be alone. So, bad news is hard to give and it's hard to take. And that is the major reason why our beloved clinicians have a hard time telling us that this treatment's not going to work anymore. There's always another treatment. And studies have shown that over-prognostication is very common. 30% of prognosis are accurate, 63% are over-prognosticated, and 17% are under. And it's because we build relationships with our doctor. And another reason is because they just don't have the time, right? They don't have the time to present bad news. Because any bad news comes with a whole bunch more questions. And we know that our visits are shorter and shorter. Now, Medicare does provide a one-time visit for advanced care planning consultation with your physician. It has a separate code. It's not like going in for a physical or for a crisis. It's going in just to have a conversation with your physician for advanced care planning. It's what our friend Sarah Palin called the death panels. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Remember the death panels where you were talking to your doctor about end of life, you're going to throw grandma under the bus? No, we want grandma to live well, and we want to have a conversation for 30 minutes that's paid by Medicare to have a deep conversation about goals of care. So Atul Gawande, most of you know the book on being mortal, which was just life-changing for our culture. How we seek to spend our time may depend on how much time we perceive ourselves to have. And that's why it's so important to have very frank, honest conversations with our doctor. I just got a text from a patient this morning. It's her husband texted me and told me about the girls graduating and the other kids are coming home from college. And this is a woman who's 52 years old. She didn't qualify for Iona Senior Services, but the mother-in-law reached out to me because her daughter-in-law had a glioblastoma. And so she was at Georgetown for months. She's had treatment and then became paralyzed, went to rehab. They took her back to surgery for her surgery in her spine, telling her that her spine could be corrected. Suffering on top of suffering. The mother-in-law reached out to me, and I said, we need to get her in hospice. And so every day matters. And so today, the husband tells me that the kids are graduating from college and high school, and they're all around, and the friends are stopping by, and she's sitting outside. Every day matters. And what made me so upset is I told the mother-in-law, I'm like, so she's had her second surgery. Both were unsuccessful. She's fully paralyzed. And the mother told me that we now have to take her out of the rehab and take her back to the surgery for her post-surgical visit. And I said, no, you know what? You don't have to do that. You can say no. And you say no, and you call Capital Caring right today. And the mother-in-law took the bull by the horns and did it. And nobody had talked to them about hospice. Very sad. Okay, so here are things we need to ask to our physicians. If you really want, like, this is what you can say. Could you tell me like it is? I need to know so I can plan. Or you could say, you see a lot of patients with this disease. What is the pathway of this disease looking like for me? Would likely take. Would you be surprised if I were to live 5 years or 1 year or 6 months? And I frequently, if I'm talking with an oncologist, I'll say, would you be surprised if this patient is gone in a year? And if the oncologist says, no, I would not be that surprised, I'd be like, have you had your hospice discussion with them? You know? It's a no-brainer. Anyway, what are the benefits and burdens of treatments you are suggesting? What are the alternatives? What happens if we don't pursue them? What would you choose to do if this were you or your partner or your parent? And that is a really important question because we need to personalize our clinicians. There used to be a time when doctors were up here and patients were very subordinate and we kind of worshiped the ground they walk on. And then it became more of a partnership, like because of the legal system, the docs were like more like we're going to work together and make decisions together. But in many ways, we need to make some of our own decisions and become self-informed. And then we need to say to our physician, well, you're informed, so tell me what you would do for you or your partner. And that is really important to say. I shared this briefly. I went to get my Shingrix vaccine the other day, and I had a big schedule the rest of the week, and I knew that the Shingrix was going to make me a little sleepy. And the doctor was like grilling me, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it. And I said, she's my friend, I said, did you get your Shingrix? And she said, no. And I said, why didn't you get it? And she's like, well, because I can't take off work to rest. And I was like, oh, interesting. So it's just an example that we need to humanize our doctors. They're just like us. They love, they poop, they pee, they go to sleep, they wake up, they go to work. And we need to ask them, what would you do for your wife if she was suffering like my wife? Okay, so what matters most? And this is, underscores what the woman that is now home with her brain cancer and with her kids. What is your conception of what matters most? Every second counts, no matter what. You want to be free of pain. You want to engage in relationships, retain autonomy. Some people I do not want any caregivers. I want to suffer. I want to change my own, make my way through my house, and I don't want anybody with me. Retaining mentation. Some patients in a hospice inpatient unit or at home may not want to start morphine because they don't want to lose their mental clarity and competency, and so that's a person's choice. Engaging in work, tasks, that are meaningful. And of course, the village is a perfect example of meaningful living, right? Like you guys give back to one another. It's purposeful. Being involved in a place like Martha's Table is purposeful, meaningful work. And I know from my mom, she was like a village she was like a one-person village, and she was constantly driving people to and from appointments. And when she could no longer drive, she used to say to me, I don't want to live because I cannot serve people. So every person has to decide what brings life meaning. Being able to live in your own home. And I know that's what the village movement's about, like living in your own home. Bravo. And not being a burden to your family and friends. That is a huge thing I hear a lot, financially, emotionally, practically, and physically. I bike to work through Rock Creek Park, and yesterday I saw this image, and I just took it really quickly because it was an elderly man and a walker and his wife, and they were birding, and she had this long camera, and I just thought this represents meaningful living, right? They both were pretty elderly, and it was just beautiful to witness them. And I stood behind them for like 5 minutes. Anyway, okay, so prolonging your life. How do we keep folks alive despite poor prognosis? And in Zitter's book, because she's an ICU doctor, she names them the big three: the feeding machines, the feeding tubes, and I think it was antibiotics, but now she also believes there's many more, of course. So feeding machines, we've learned through COVID that you can have just simple oxygen or face masks or BiPAP or CPAP or all kinds of technology. A ventilator, which usually requires people being sedated because you have a tube down your trachea. And she describes in her book that there's usually like a 2-week window. Like people shouldn't be on ventilators for years, and yet they are. But ideally, they should not be on ventilators too long because the body it's just not much success after that. And when we would take people off ventilators in hospice, sometimes they would live. Like you wean people down the oxygen, and they would actually survive off a ventilator for a while. Feeding tubes are sometimes put in for short term. If somebody's having like an episodic event, and they can put a feeding tube in, but then they're always hard to take out. Many people in nursing homes, I think 1/3 of the people in nursing homes have long-term feeding tubes. They have artificial feeding to keep them alive. And if you don't want a feeding tube, you got to document it. The default will always be to overtreat. Dialysis is for kidney disease, transfusions. People become transfusion dependent, especially if they have a hemolytic illness like oncology disorder where they're losing a lot of red blood cells. They'll get transfused, every month, every couple weeks, and you will keep getting entitled to that because that's how we go. And you finally have to come in and say no more transfusions, and then you would pass from that. Antibiotics are also used as life-sustaining, and so that's the kind of thing like Emmy Lou and I talk about. If you get an infection and a pneumonia and you need to go to the hospital for IV antibiotics, do you want that? And she said, no, I want that to be the reason I'm dying. So antibiotics are also life-sustaining. And surveys show that most people, including clinicians, do not want heroic measures. Dying doesn't cause suffering. Resistance to dying does. Okay, and then how to advance end of life. Okay, these are the things really quickly. Palliative compassionate extubation, where I was describing we slowly wean you off and then people extubate. Palliative sedation is something you can do at home with hospice where you give people a little bit more morphine to make sure they're perfectly comfortable and they become sedated. Palliative, not curative radiation and chemo, which can be used, and I think hospice also allows concurrent, like if you have a terrible tumor, that a radiation might help reduce the tumor, which then reduces the pain. You could use that as a palliative radiation. Stopping ICDs, which are cardioverter defibrillators, just turning them off, like turning off a pacemaker. Voluntary stopping eating and drinking. We're going to talk about that in one of the seminars. That's actually just deciding to slowly decrease your intake and then stopping eating. Stopping dialysis, stopping ECMO, which is kind of like an out-of-body blood and breathing machine that we use for like heart transplants. And then medical aid in dying. We have a wonderful workshop today planned by Compassion and Choices to talk about that. And it's illegal in the district, and we'll dive deeper into that. Whoopsie. Okay, so did I go too far? Okay, so Okay, so if you do not achieve the lowest quality of life, where would you go on the spectrum? You would allow for natural death, or do you want to do everything to be your decision and not your partner's decision even? Like I sometimes say, don't have your spouse as your power of attorney because they might keep you alive forever. Because one, they may love you so much, or because they want to torture you. Okay, so communicate and document. No one can read your mind. 50% of people have not had a conversation with your family. 40% of us, less than 40%, have not had a conversation with our doctors. And only 27% have documented advance directives. You may have the best plans, but unless you're communicating and documented, there's surely chaos and suffering. Care is impacted by not communicating, and the default will always be treatment because that's what we do. We have a lot of treatments, and especially living in Washington, D.C. with all these major medical centers, we treat. And we also have a city of lawyers, right? Lawyers. And lawyers and lots of medicine. And so we are in a very heavily treated environment. And this little book here says here, this is another great book, Finish Strong, by Barbara Coombs, she used to be the president of Compassionate Choices. She said, end-of-life discussions are associated with less aggressive medical care near death and earlier hospice referrals. Aggressive care is associated with worse patient quality of life and worse bereavement adjustments. And that is so true, because if you ever want to compare somebody like my current friend, my current patient, I feel like she's a friend, she's 52 years old, she's at home with her family. And so the bereavement after her death will be so much different than if she had gone back to surgery and been tormented again. And people have very complicated grief because of that. And I don't think the doctors get that. Okay, this gentleman, I won't go into him. I talked to him about him in my last one. His name is RP. He had cancer. He had no one talk to him about hospice. He went into rehab, of course, because rehab is covered by Medicare, and it's an easy way to get you out of the hospital and get you in another facility and free up the hospital bed. Happens all the time. All of my patients are in rehab inappropriately. This man, I went to meet him. His priest took me from St. Albans. I looked at him. I'm like, why hasn't anyone talked to him about hospice? He, as a man of faith, said, I'm fine with hospice, let's do it. So we got everything situated for the next day. I went to his house, we set up the equipment, Capital Caring came on board right away. We're literally on the way out the door, but I don't think documents were signed. And anyway, he got sent, he'd spiked a fever, got sent to got sent to Sibley, went to surgery because he had an abscess in his arm. It was first of all, he was in the ER for 2 full days, 48 hours, 2 full days. And we couldn't get him out of the hospital. It was like his friends were there, I was there. I kept saying, why isn't anyone following through on that? And they were like, no, he's going to be admitted and he's going to have surgery. Anyway, and it was so hard because he had an out-of-town sister, we didn't have documentation, and we had not planned. And even though, the gentleman was so precious, and he ended up passing in the hospital. And what was hard for me was that the young nurse was so bereaved, the nurse who had to take care of him. She knew his condition, and she knew that he was being tortured. Okay, tools to communicate. We're going to talk about these today. Advanced directives, the MOLS, the PULSE, hospital DNRs, and a medical alert bracelet is also great. And I have one more minute. This is Congressional Cemetery. My friend Bob Hoffman's on the right. He's in the gray shirt. Awesome. He took his whole family to his plot at Congressional Cemetery to talk about his 75th birthday, no less. And he talked about his end-of-life goals with his whole family present. Podcasted it. He's got it going. This is at the Smithsonian right now, and the Futures exhibit. I just saw it a few weeks ago, and this is like a human I don't think this is human composting, but it's another way of like doing a burial, and we're going to talk about some of that today as well. But these are kind of things that people can document. You can also write a letter to your family. If you have to make a quick medical decision, which most of them are quick, choose comfort, choose home, choose less intervention, choose to be together with me, singing, laughing, getting along with each other, telling stories, and don't make a fuss, and know that I'm very proud of each of you. Who are the people that you trust? Identify, and you want to share your thoughts and fears with. That's important. What are the best times to talk about this? Holidays, graduations, medical procedures, when you get your Medicare card, when you have your license renewed. There's different events in our life that it might be a good time to bring some of these conversations up. And if you bring them up, your adult children will just love it, because it's hard for them to bring it up because they see you as immortal. And it's really important for you to say, this is what I want, and I need you to love me enough to help me have a good death. Okay, I'm not going to tell you about Gail, but this is a friend of mine who lives alone, has a house in the Northwest, she took in an African family from Ethiopia. They were torture survivors. That was a torture survivor. She helped raise the kids. Both the kids are now, like, this girl has a master's degree, other child is in college, and she told me something very powerful, that aging and retirement is about building community. It's not just about your finances. And I just feel like she is such a great example of aging well. Okay, and I'm going to leave. These are personal. We'll talk. Okay, I thought I had 45 minutes, not half an hour. Okay, so these.
Because we
Yeah. Okay, these are just tools that we'll talk about, and you'll see those, and that's about it. My last final message is, you're not alone. There are resources and people who can help navigate the path of aging, and that we belong to one another, right?
So this isn't the end of Dixie because I stopped her because to have questions both from the virtual audience and from you guys. And this is a test of the skills of hybrid, which I don't know how we're going to really, but you will hear Dixie's thoughts on these questions. So are you getting...
I'm sorry if I talk so fast. Oh, yeah, sure can.
Yeah, this will be emailed, right?
And you might be able to get copies of these, but this is just a list I've collected, and they're really good tools. And you know, one of the tools I think I have right here is the Compassion and Choices one, and it's free. And I have it on the next slide. This is the tool. It's a free copy, and Wendy Miner at compassionandchoices.org will give you this amazing booklet. It's like 24 pages, and it talks about your values and your a dementia provision. If you're somebody that's dealing with memory loss, you might want to say, you know what, if I don't know who you are, don't feed me, or don't send me back to the hospital and get an IV antibiotic, because I don't want to live much longer if I don't know who you are. But you have to say that, you know, while you're able to still have competency. So anyway, let me get that one back on there.
And I'm, with a little luck, Donna Smith, who's going to be our third of the speakers, will bring those. I hope she'll bring
she's bringing them. I talked to Donna yesterday,
great.
And she's our she's the national outreach for Compassion and Choices.
So,
anybody else have a question?
are there any questions coming in the chat? No? Okay, you left everybody speechless.
I'm sorry, but is there a way to turn off that light so it's not reflecting on the screen and blinding us?
Oh, that light. I don't.
Repositioning that light so it's not apparently putting a glare on the screen.
Okay, there are all our friends that are out in the virtual world. I could read their names so you know, because a lot of them you know. We have Patricia Malum, well, we have Tricia G. I don't know who she is.
The question's off to the side.
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
There's a question there. For someone who doesn't have Medicare yet, like your 52-year-old patient, how is hospice paid for?
It's paid for by her insurance company. Insurance companies actually like hospice. It saves them money. It actually saves Medicare money, but we haven't connected the dots. Like, that's what makes me so crazy. This, you know, people, they'll send you back to ICU for a year and Medicare will pay for it, but they won't give more benefits to hospice. And a lot of people can't choose hospice because they may not have the resources to have extra caregivers at home. So people do actually have to default and stay in the hospital. And that breaks my heart because hospice is somewhat of a stingy benefit under Medicare.
Can you just explain
summarize what you mean when you say hospice? Because I have to confess, I have a very vague idea of what you mean.
Okay. So what do you know about it? Can you say what you know?
I have this idea of going into a facility where they just give you, like, medication to keep you free from pain, and you have visitors come who are family and friends.
I want to interrupt a minute because
We are gonna, yeah, we're gonna have this, the
this
expert
is
on
what
it is right
Donna
here.
Gayles is going to tell us.
Can I do a
But that's-
piggyback question?
Yeah,
You use the
sure.
language, if you're eligible for
Right.
hospice. So would you combine that with?
Yeah, so as a nurse, knowing that somebody really wanted hospice, I had to dig through their charts and make sure that their comorbidities, like they might have a little heart disease, but not a bad enough heart disease to qualify for a terminal heart disease. But then if they have a little kidney disease or they have maybe a history of cancer, I could put it all together and say, this person is potentially terminal with a less than 6-month prognosis. But I think it's good to say less than a year prognosis. So that's why I asked doctors the question, because I want people to be under hospice longer and not shorter. Because the longer you're under it, the longer you live. And people can go in and out of hospice. We were just saying that you have a patient for 3 years, right?
They want to see this PowerPoint.
And I'll talk more about that as well. But
It is so important to know that. But because we use it for less than 7 days, we all hear, oh, so-and-so went into hospice. I think it was Roy, you told me about your sister, right? So people go into hospice late, and then they pass, right? So then we associate, oh, hospice makes you die, right? It has that new image. But hospice actually helps you live longer. And I am a convert. I cannot tell you what a zealot I am about this because it's so important that people understand that. And we need to ask the doctors for a hospice referral, just to say, can you have a clinician come in from hospice and talk to me about the benefit and see whether I can make an informed decision if I want this or not, as opposed to going into some other experience that I might suffer a lot. So we have to ask for it. And if we ask for it, I think doctors are more willing to say, oh, okay, because the doctors don't want to bring up the H word, right? They do not want to bring it up.
There's a question online. Can you explain the distinction between palliative care and hospice?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Donna's going to go into that more in depth, but all I know is what I was saying, and I've accompanied so many friends to their oncology appointments because I feel like I want to walk with them on that journey, and it helps me learn as a nurse. And I often will ask the oncologist, can we please have a palliative care consult with the oncology? So alternating visits, my friends will do alternating visit with a palliative care clinician, which is not for end-of-life care, it's for symptom management. Okay? That's the main difference.
Dixie, on one of your charts, I noticed DNRs. And I recently heard something I was a little surprised about, that this would be for somebody not yet in hospice, who's declining, has a DNR, but might get surgery for, say, comfort or whatever, but that in surgery they will not honor a DNR, or at least in many hospitals won't. Is that true? And
Well, I think because they're using technologies to do the surgery, right? And so they want to wait till that he's out of surgery and gets back to a stable position. But if you're choosing to go to surgery, but sometimes people do, like if you go to Sibley right now, I think they hand you an advance directive in the emergency room now because they want to introduce the language. But if you're choosing to have like heart surgery, it's an aggressive procedure, and so it would be complicated for doctors to kind of decide how to manage that. And then after the surgery, while you're recovering, if things go bad, then you could write a DNR order.
okay, it makes sense as long as you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, you
when
know what
go
you're
in.
getting into.
How does a person with a serious illness make contact with somebody like you to be their advocate as they walk through all of this?
Call Iona. Yeah, I'm a nurse care manager at Iona, and I do when Mary came to the expo, and the expo came out of having death cafes at Iona. We have a lot of outreach programs. So I started doing death cafes, and at the death cafe, there were so many questions. And then we planned the expo, which was this all-day event. And then you guys beautifully replicated it here, which I'm so excited about. And this was one of our speakers, Lily, at the expo. And, you know, it's like, it's bringing, like, I just feel like this is such a happy place for me because all my people are here. This is like a party. But I guess it's because it's like like-minded people, right? And so I'm at Iona as a care manager because I really feel like we have to have these conversations. While we're still healthy and living and active, we have to have the conversations. So anyway, blessings to you all.
Sheridan is one of our
Yeah.
workshop leaders later.
This isn't a question, it's just a thank you for introducing me to the phrase death activist.
Yeah,
What was
yeah.
yours? End-of-life activist. I didn't know that's what I was.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Yeah, bravo to you. And we have to become activists. And I tell young nurses when I see them, when they pull me off to the side and they're so weeping and distraught, and they say, what can I do? And I say, be an activist. That's the only way we change anything, is we have to be activists. We can't just be supporters. We have to be activists. So anyway, we got to change the Medicare system and help it be more generous with services like hospice and conversations. And anyway, the list goes on. But
So we actually have about a 16-minute break. And then we're going to have Donna Gayles also fire us up and she is going to talk about Capital Caring is one of two big hospice or companies here. The other is Vitas. And so she deals with patients all the time. And I will do more of an introduction to her when the time comes. She will start at 10:30. So you have time to talk with each other, find the restrooms, stand in line for the restrooms, stand in line for coffee. And
fill out your advanced directives.
yeah, that's right. There will be workshops where you can actually do your advanced directives, and I confess that I have been, in the eyes of my primary care physician at MedStar, who is a geriatrician, who asks me every single time she sees me, have you filled out your medical advanced directive? And I say, I take a copy and I say, no, the next time you'll see me. So one of my motivation for helping with this particular event is say to yourself, Proctor, this is embarrassing. You have to do these because you're running these programs and you're not filling out these advanced directives.
Yeah, it's true. I think we do have to teach what we need to learn ourselves, right? So I think it's great that you're channeling your desires in a very profound way. Good for you, Mary. I love Mary. It's great.
Feeling is obviously mutual. So you're free to do whatever you want. You're free to do whatever you want till 10:30, but be back promptly.